Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 13th Annual SLO Symposium. This is our student panel. My name is Dr. Alicia Betancourt. I am Faculty Assessment Coordinator at San Diego City College. I am also an instructor in psychology. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this session and to introduce our student panelists. This panel actually grew out of a Friday SLO talk conversation we held back in October, on October 31st, actually. And during that session, we posed 5 questions about the meaning of learning and what counts as evidence of learning from the student perspective. The dialogue was candid, thoughtful, and practical, and the success of that discussion sparked the idea to bring a student panel to the symposium this year. So today, our panelists will respond to 5 more questions. They will reflect on how their ideas about learning have changed over time, when grades do and do not reflect capability, how pressure shapes student choices, what kinds of assessments best reveal learning, and what instructors do that most clearly signals what counts as learning and helps students demonstrate it. So before we begin question one, I'd like to invite each panelist to introduce themselves. Please share your name, school, major, and current level, and then briefly answer this. Why is learning important to you right now, and what perspective or experience are you hoping to bring to today's conversation? And I'm going to go ahead and see if Bo would like to start that conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. I appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Bo Scott. I'm currently at the dissertation stage right now at Indiana University in their instructional systems technology program. I have been a student there since 2021, and let's see here. My current position, it's actually changed since the October conversations that we had. I'm now the executive director of customer success for a new company called MathLab AI, where we are utilizing a smart pen technology and combining that with an artificial intelligence algorithm to help analyze student work in mathematics to help curb the trends that we're seeing in math across the country that have really been downward since about 2012, 2013. And really, if I had to say my reason that learning is so important to me right now at the moment, it's one, trying to learn the ways that we can help to help our students succeed in mathematics. But in general, I guess if it was from a personal lens, I just value the constant personal growth that learning opportunities continue to bring to me. And I love the blending of those through the self-directed lens in terms of how my curiosity plays out for identifying new solutions to things.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bo, and thank you for being here. Um, Leah, I know that you are also here. Would you like to go?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. My name is Leah. I'm currently an undergrad student at the University of Toronto. As for my major, I'm studying sociology and political science, and I'm doing a Bachelor of Arts. For me, I think learning, especially in this current moment in the world that we're in right now, and especially studying a field like political science and like sociology, is really about learning what we as people can do to make the world a better place and help out our neighbors where we can.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much, Leah. And then Samantha, I believe I saw you as well. If you would like to share.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam. I am a recent graduate from UCLA. I got my master's in June, my master's of social welfare, and a few certificates. Um, I uh, don't currently have a position, but I am looking for one. I hope to eventually apply to doctoral programs, so looking more in the academia side of things and research. And I'm especially interested and currently studying trauma, but more how it relates to resilience, but how we can look at resilience as something that shouldn't be forced upon people, but something that, what are the protective factors that do promote it rather than looking at it purely pathologically. And then learning is so important to me because of kind of what I just mentioned. I think that there are so many different ways to learn and take on problems in our world. And I think that the more you learn and the different fields that you interact with, the more you kind of get a more holistic understanding of whatever it is you're looking at. And I think that's really the key in whatever field you're looking at, to get the most full sides of everything that you're looking at. And similar to what Leah was saying, I think learning especially is super important right now. I feel like, especially on social media, on news platforms, there's so much where I just look at things and I'm like, wow, there's so much learning to be done today. So I'm really excited to talk about that.
Really is a lifelong process. Thank you all. Bill is not quite with us yet, at least not that I have seen. So he will be joining us in just a little bit. But thank you all. We're grateful for each of you being here, taking time out of your day and sharing your experiences with us. And if you are all ready, I will go ahead and move into question one. And thank you to those of you that are joining us and sharing where you're from and what type of student instructor you are. I see an ESL instructor, nursing instructor. So please keep sharing, and welcome to the student panel. All right. So let's go ahead and move into, if I can get this to move. There we go. All right, so going into question one, this is faculty role in making learning visible. So most students enter higher education with certain expectations about what learning will look like, listening to lectures, taking exams, writing papers, earning grades. Over time, many discover that learning often happens through challenge, mistakes, feedback, and applying skills in unfamiliar situations. So looking back from semester to semester and year to year, how have your expectations about learning compared with what learning has actually looked like in your experience? And I'm not sure who would like to begin, but Bo, you look like you are ready.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm more than happy to jump in here. Sorry, I tend to talk a lot. um, I think, just thinking back to my the start of my doctoral work at IU. It was definitely very different, coming into this than any other level that I've had, master's or bachelor's. And the thing that was very interesting, Dr. Bonk, it was one of my professors, and one of the things that he kind of highlighted in one of his classes, it was learning environments design. And then his emerging learning technologies class, it was very interesting because I think a lot of the students, when they jumped into that, um, they felt like, we were going to get the opportunity to really start diving into the technologies and utilizing them, as opposed to really studying them in a theoretical way. And so the way that my mind kind of shifted about what the role was in terms of, those courses, is it's not specifically utilizing those technologies within the course, but learning about them and then applying what we've learned into our careers. And so one of the things that came through the technologies course, that was really my first foray into diving into artificial intelligence. And it really sparked a lot of curiosity in me. And I kind of alluded to this the other day when I was writing a piece for Jarek, and I talked a little bit about how the experience that I had learning from a gentleman named Ray Schroeder in one of the courses. It really got me diving into AI and considering the applications that this had throughout the educational field. And had I not had that opportunity, I never would have pursued AI as heavily as I have over the course of the last 3-4 years now. And it's really caused a big shift, not just in my philosophical outlook, but in the work that I've been doing in the field of education throughout that time as well.
Oh, thank you. Leah or Samantha, would one of you like to speak?
I can go ahead.
Thank you.
I didn't mention it in my intro, but I'm 18 years old. I'm a second year student, so I'm really just starting my educational journey. So I don't know how much input I can give here, but I think something that I really didn't expect going into university was the culture of competition that's really present among students. I've noticed that there's a lot of gatekeeping of resources, of knowledge, of skills, and I think that's sort of been baked into the culture of higher education. We're all fighting to be in the same, top 15 or top 20% of the class. And we take that ranking among our peers as evidence of our learning, which I think places a lot of emphasis on assessment and grades and GPAs rather than from actually challenging ourselves and pushing our learning further and questioning the taken for granted assumptions that we bring to education. And I think that's something that we all contribute to, whether that be students or faculty or administrators. And I think that what has really changed for me in the last year at U of T has been the realization that rankings are not a proper indicator of learning or of skill. And I think really pushing back on that culture of competition and learning, seeking to help my peers, to learn from my peers, and to get them to challenge me and my thoughts is something that has really changed my outlook on schooling.
Thank you so much for sharing about the culture of competition. And I'm sure it varies from university to university and where you're at, what program you're in, but that is a valuable piece to mention is that competitive aspect. Samantha, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Sorry. Yes. So when I first entered higher education, I honestly did expect learning to look pretty straightforward. Listening to lectures, studying material, taking exams, and earning grades. And I did assume that if I worked hard and did well on those things, that would mean I was learning. And in some ways, that structure did help early on, but I feel like I quickly learned that a lot of those things I was doing weren't actually sticking with me. And as I moved from semester to semester and year to year, my understanding of learning definitely shifted. I realized that the learning that actually stayed with me didn't come from just performing well, but from being challenged and having support during those challenges. The moments where I think I learned the most were when I felt most uncomfortable, probably, and when I didn't immediately understand something. It was when I made mistakes or when I had to apply real skills in new or real world situations. However, it wasn't just the challenges and kind of having to think outside the box or apply that made those things productive for me, I think. It was having flexibility and support also built into that learning process. So when I had opportunities to ask questions, revise my work, or not be perfect right away, that is when I felt like I engaged more deeply and took more intellectual risks. So without that support challenge, honestly, to me, in many cases, especially early on, felt like failure. But with more of that support, those challenges, especially, as I progressed in my educational career and getting my graduate degree, it definitely became part of that learning process. So while my early expectation was that learning would be measured mainly through grades and outcomes, the reality to me is that learning has meant navigating difficulty over time with guidance, reflection, and room to grow. Emphasis on that. Looking back, the semesters where learning felt most meaningful were the ones where struggle was expected and supported rather than punished, which I think, currently our education system emphasizes more of that punitive piece rather than that supportive piece.
Samantha, can I ask a question? Yeah. I there's a video that I love. It's called the Learning Pit, and it really does a very nice job of illustrating that concept of productive struggle, like you said, and the value of that in the educational process. When you were in your program, did you find that the supports that got you through those productive struggle opportunities that you were given, were those provided to you from your professors, your instructors, or did that come mainly from your peers? Because that's one of the things, at least that I've found in since I've started my doctoral work, is that the social side of learning, the connections with my peers, those are the individuals that have really helped me to push through those struggle opportunities that I've been provided.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really important piece there. Like, where does the support actually come from? How do we make that support tangible? And social support, not even just in learning and so many other things, does so much for us as human beings. And I think, reflecting on my master's journey, the support that I can immediately think of are from either mentors, instructors, or exactly that, my peers. I think, though, something that I was thinking of while you're speaking, Bo, was that, some of that support, though, I had to go out and kind of get, right? Especially when it came to professors or mentors, right? That wasn't already readily available to me. So, they talk about networking, right? When you get into academia and, getting to know your professors, going to office hours and all that stuff. So if I hadn't put in a certain amount of effort, I definitely wouldn't have gotten the support that I needed to thrive. And I think that's another thing that we should critically look at when we're thinking about building our education systems is how do we make that support more implicit and built in for students so that we're not just leaning on our peers. And a lot of that leaning on our peers is honestly venting to each other about how hard it is and how lack of support we're getting.
Wow, that's really powerful for instructors and districts to hear is just how much students need access to support and how sometimes they feel like, they don't have access to it unless they're really out there advocating for themselves, um, which some students just don't even know where to begin when it comes to that. So I'm glad that you have Bo and Samantha both mentioned, the social support and how much that played a role in your ability to learn. All right. Anything else to add for question number one, Leah or Samantha or Bo?
Yeah. Alicia, I'm so sorry. I saw Bill made it. I don't know if
Yeah.
he's Bill made it in. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bill, welcome. We're so glad you could join us. If you could please just introduce yourself, your name, your school, major, current level, and then why is learning important to you right now? We would love to hear from you before we move into question two.
So my name is Bill, and I'm currently a sophomore studying uh communication design, kind of like graphic design and HCI, just like developing websites and apps at Carnegie Mellon. And I think learning is important to me right now because I feel like it's a very important step in your developmental journey. It's one step about the actual knowledge that you learn, like the things that will help you accelerate your career or like be better at navigating life. But the other side is just like, what does this knowledge change you as a person? Like knowing more makes you more mature, and I think that's really important. So recently, I've been like trying to step out my comfort zone and learning a lot of different things, especially as like an art student. I think there's a lot of things to be both like learning from like the artistic side and also like the academic side as well.
Excellent. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you.
All right. And then I'm going to move into question two, but if um, there we go. Okay, so higher education can reward grades more than growth, which can kind of blur the line between genuine learning and simply performing well on assessments. And with pressure to maintain a high GPA or meet scholarship requirements, students may focus on results rather than building um, lasting skills. So, from your perspective, when do grades accurately reflect what a student can actually do, and when do they fail to reflect real learning? And then also, how true is it that students care more about grades than learning itself? And do high grades necessarily prove that learning has occurred? So, Bill, let me know if you'd like to lead this, but no pressure too if somebody else would like to step in. But Bill, if you're ready, go ahead. Otherwise, we can move on to another panelist first.
Yeah. Mm, I think at my school, it's kind of hard to say because there's like a culture of like grade deflation. So a lot of professors give out grades that are very like harsh, especially like within like the STEM and computer science like aspects. I think the way that like a lot of like academic classes taught here is that like A is basically for the top class. It's not curved in the way that like only a certain people can get it, but it's very like hard to reach that point unless you actually fully comprehend the material. And B is where everybody is kind of like lying if they're just studying hard normally and going through the classes. And C just means that you didn't study. I think that a good way to kind of gauge this is through regular and low stakes assessments. We have quizzes every single week. Like that sounds like crazy, and it is, but it's like I think it's stressful for the students in the moment, but when you look back to it, it's a lot easier for students to have to like cram one day every week for that quiz rather than just like be really stressed about your midterm and finals. So I think a good way to actually stick with learning is to just make your classes harder and increase your support system. Like I think challenge is something that people naturally get adapted to. It might be hard for you the first week. Like it's really stressful to be like going through so many classes and have so many tests. But as you gradually get used to it, you'll be so surprised by the amount of like work you can do and the amount of output and learning that you can create. So I think that's one of the biggest like things I learned is that if you just have a lot of challenge and that challenge is supported by people and professors who knows like how to push students but also not burn them out, I think it's really good for the students to accelerate their learning and be able to get to a level that's not normally seen at like an undergrad level or like at a graduate level.
Okay, thank you. Any other panelists want to step in and respond to this as well? Go ahead, Bo.
I'm gonna throw this all the way back to I think this was my first year in while I was working on my bachelor's degree. I was very excited. Just frame of reference here. I started off in elementary education, and so I was very excited because I was getting the opportunity to take my very first children's literature class, and I went to the bookstore and I walked away with a mountain of kids books, which were the books for the semester, and I loved it. And I talked to my sister about this, and she'd gone through the same program that I had previously, and she immediately told me that I was going to hate the class because of the instructor for this. And I got into the class. The professor, her name was Professor Jill May. She'd literally written the textbook for the course, and so we would be in there, and she would refer to herself in third person. She'd say on page 17, May says this, and she'd quote herself, and it was really uncomfortable. But I found her very intriguing, and we submitted our first essay for the class, and she was very much known for harsh grading, especially at the start of the year. And I got an F on my first essay. And I'm going to tie this back a little bit to the previous question as well, because this is where I really learned the value of going into the office hours and really making those connections with the instructors for these courses. And so after a couple of weeks pondering on this, I went into her office hours, and I ended up spending 2 hours in there with her. And I was in there for so long that her husband came in and found out that he was my dad's favorite professor when my dad was doing his undergrad as well. So all this to say, we get through the entire semester, And my grades ended up being fine moving forward. One of my friends, though, she'd scored lower on me on every single assignment, every single essay, every single quiz in the course, and she got a higher grade than me. And I at first was a little bit frustrated with this, but then I talked with Professor May about this afterwards, and she told me that what she actually tends to do is to value the growth process, and she grades on growth rather than simply the outcomes of the grades over the course of the semester. And I walked away, having a completely different perspective on this. And going into my teaching career as an elementary teacher, I spent 6 years working with high ability students in fourth and fifth grade, and that was always their question: is are we being graded on this? And I tried to so desperately tried to get that mind shift taken care of in them at a young age, that it's not necessarily about the grades, it's about what you are learning and what you're taking away from it as an individual. And that's not the easiest thing to communicate to graduate level students. It's not the easiest thing to communicate to 11 and 12-year-olds either. But once you really do understand that it can be something that's internal and it means something to you, as opposed to just what you're seeing as the grade on the end paper there on the summative assessment or whatever. Um, Once you can make that mind shift and you can really value it from an intrinsic perspective, it really is a valuable thing to take away from educational experiences like this.
Oh, absolutely. We share the elementary education background, and
Yeah,
children's lit in my favorite classes.
mine too.
All right, Samantha or Leah, do either of you want to go ahead and respond next?
I can go next if that's okay. Okay. Um, I think there is some truth to the idea that students feel pressure to focus on grades. There's definitely no question that scholarships, requirements, but also societal expectations push people to prioritize results. I certainly am not immune to that pressure and have honestly felt terrible about myself when I didn't get the grade I hoped for. But I don't think that necessarily means students care more about grades than learning. I've seen plenty of students who care deeply about understanding, growth, and genuinely becoming skilled in their craft. They're just navigating a system that doesn't always value that. Our system is built in a way where even if you focus more on these things, that doesn't mean you'll necessarily thrive. Yet people still have real world implications to think about, like we've mentioned. And, money is a thing, food is a thing, having a roof over your head is a thing. And I think if it's coming across that students care more about grades than learning, then that to me is not only pointing to a cultural issue, as in a culture of our education system directly producing, but also hints that grades and learning must not be one and the same. High grades, in my experience, don't necessarily prove real learning has happened. You can memorize material, check boxes, or follow instructions perfectly and still not have a deep understanding of how to apply it or translate it into meaningful action. Often, that kind of knowledge is also forgotten as soon as the test or course is over because of the way students are pressured to cram, perform, and then move on within fast paced, outcome driven academic systems. So, to me, sometimes high grades simply mean a person knows how to navigate the bureaucracy of academia, and it doesn't really mean that they've truly learned. I've even had peers, come to me and be like, "Sam, how are you like doing this so well? How did you like do this thing?" And I always tell them, "I've just had more practice in this bureaucratic system than you have. I know how to work around it and navigate it, and I know my way around. Um, that doesn't mean that I know more than you."
Absolutely. And I think that really hits on that last question. Do high grades necessarily prove that there's learning, or is it being able to navigate the system. Absolutely. Those are wonderful points. I think everything that's being said is incredibly powerful. As an instructor, this gives us such good feedback for, how can we best assess learning and, do those high grades necessarily mean that learning has actually occurred? And then, Leah, was there anything that you would like to add to this as well?
Yes, absolutely. I would absolutely echo what Sam has said. I think, in my experience, for many students who have high grades, it's not as much about learning as it is about strategy. I can do 1,000 passes of a flashcard, memorize all the sections of the Constitution, but still not understand how that applies to everyday life. And I've noticed that we've sort of come to know what will be tested and what will not, how exactly to follow instructions, the specific things to memorize, the specific things to include on papers, what margin size to use, what lectures to go to, what lectures to not go to, rather than it being a question of who best understands the material and who's best able to apply it. And I think that this is especially true in our current age of generative AI, where students have sort of learned to strategically outsource their learning to a chatbot. And I know that there are so many efforts to combat this phenomenon, but students are still finding ways to achieve high grades in classes without having truly learned anything more than ever before. And I think that what instructors often struggle to understand is that simply putting a clause in your syllabus that says, using generative AI is considered an academic offense is not really sufficient anymore. Unfortunately, these softwares have become a part of our reality. And I think there's a real missed opportunity there in higher education for instructors to teach their students about the implications of using AI tools and how they can be used to enhance rather than to outsource critical learning. And I think that's true for the rest of academia as well, is to say that it's not just about the techniques and the ways that you, as Sam said, navigate the bureaucracy or navigate education, but actually ensuring that students are able to critically analyze the things that they've learned and apply it to their everyday lives.
Absolutely. That was a wonderful way to bring in the use of AI and, adding that to the conversation about learning, because we're looking at output, and if it's being created by someone else, then are you truly actually learning? Um, but if you're still receiving that high grade, we look at it as, is this somebody that's actually learning this, or are they just able to navigate the system? Absolutely. And I see some really good comments in the chat, so I highly recommend looking in there. And I've actually written down a couple of questions that got asked in there, so if we have time at the end, we can absolutely address some of those as well. All right, let's go ahead and move into question number 3. Okay, so in many programs, grades and GPA carry real consequences, which I believe, Samantha, I think it was you that talked about this. Scholarships, transfer opportunities, internships, graduate school admissions, and even family expectations. That pressure can shape how students approach coursework. But instead of prioritizing skill development, students may focus on what earns points most efficiently, choosing safer assignments, avoiding risks that could possibly lower a grade, or look for shortcuts that produce acceptable results with minimal time. In a high stakes GPA environment, how often do students optimize for results rather than building skills? And what drives that choice in your experience? I'll give you a moment to think about that and then see who would like to tackle that first. Any takers from our panel?
Sorry, Bo, go ahead. No, okay. I would say, just speaking from personal experience, I've definitely had that experience before of thinking, could I take a creative approach or a different approach to a certain essay or a certain assignment, and then being discouraged from doing so. The most common feedback on my assignments is, you're taking on too much. And I think that's especially true in undergraduate institutions and larger institutions like my own, where there's often not enough time or funding for TAs or professors to spend more than, say, 10 or 15 minutes with a paper. And I think it's often discouraging for students to be put into a box of how we should respond to certain prompts or how we should approach certain assignments just to achieve that specific grade. And I think that it can sometimes actually hinder learning rather than providing students with the tools that they need to succeed in the future. I think that part of navigating assignments on our own and being able to take creative and novel approaches is part of what's necessary in the workforce. So I don't think that that necessarily sets students up for success. And the best assignments, the best assessments that I've ever had were ones that were open-ended, that allowed students to actually apply what they've learned in the field, bring that back and analyze that in a unique way.
Yeah, and Bo, we'll go ahead and jump over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just thinking back to undergraduate work again as well. I was in, a field where, I was, one of the only males in the course, and so I had a very different mindset and approach to some of the assignments than a lot of my peers did. I had one class specifically. I'll never forget this. I got partnered up with somebody, and she looked at me and she goes, "Bo, don't even worry about doing anything because I'm going to change all your stuff in the end anyhow and make it how I want it." And so, she and I had a great relationship, but that was always her mindset because she was so meticulous about doing it specifically, to the rubric. And I was always much more adventurous in a lot of the coursework that I developed and wanting to try and apply things in a kind of a more abstract fashion. And sometimes that did get me in trouble in terms of grades, but I feel like the outcomes in terms of what I actually did learn throughout the processes was a lot more valuable, and it gave me a little bit of a different takeaway than a lot of my peers had. And I think that translated into more risk taking as well in terms of my career. And a lot of teachers, especially in the K-12 setting, they're always going to be very very meticulous about addressing the standards that are needed, and not always concerned about whether or not it's what's best for kids. And that was always my focus. It was to provide my students those out of the box experiences and unique learning opportunities that they might not have gotten in other classrooms. And I hope that in all the work that I do with teachers now, that they get that same feeling, and they get that sense of risk taking that is necessary to create unique learning opportunities for our children.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what was being mentioned by Leah was maybe being discouraged from being creative. And that seems to bring up a big issue because in the workplace, like Leah mentioned, it's actually a valuable skill to have to be able to think of different ways to create different problem solving and things like that. So that's a great point to bring up. And then just being, I think this leads back to somebody was answering in the first question about the competition aspect. I think this was Leah again. But if we are having that competition outlook in undergrad, Bo, hearing your experience, it almost feels like that was part of your experience in the workforce as well, was almost this competition aspect instead of collaboration. So you can see these, trickle down effects from undergrad into the workplace as well. Bill or Samantha, would you like to touch on this? Bill, go ahead.
I can go ahead. I think I think the best classes that I had are kind of going from both sides. So one side is that you have the classes that are deliberately interesting and difficult. And then I think these classes are usually the ones that students chose themselves. Like the best classes I had are not necessarily like the required ones where I had to be in there and focusing on this because it's a part of my major, but not, but rather it's like I choose this class because I'm interested in it. And these classes are usually the most interesting and students spend the most time on it. So I think that is very important. It's like gouging what your actual interest is. And the second one is kind of like the complete opposite, is that it's the classes that you don't expect to be interesting, but due to the nature of the professor or the teacher teaching the coursework really enthusiastically and making the work uniquely like inspiring to the students, those classes are also very like those classes are also some of the best classes I had. I clearly remember when I was in high school, my favorite class was like AP Lit. Not because like I loved like reading or like I loved English, but because like the teacher, he would inspire us by reading these like passages and then relating it to his own personal life and kind of like seeing how he his personal stories are due to these like books that really inspired us. So I think in a sense, the teacher and the professor is the one who matters most. Like it's not about the coursework almost. Like you have to think about the way that you're influencing the students. It's not like a regurgitation of knowledge. Like I know this and you don't know this, and I'm gonna teach you. But it's like I'm going to make you a better person through my coursework. And that's the most important, regardless of what you're teaching. Because ultimately, when you're like 30 years old in your workforce, you're not going to remember that coursework, right? Nobody's going to remember history or math or calculus, that type of thing. But they're going to remember that teacher who's make them feel seen and heard in their environment. Like if they're sick and one day and then this professor's like, okay, you can take a break, like that kind of thing is way more important, I think.
Wow, that was really powerful to hear as an instructor. Um, Absolutely. Samantha, would you like to add anything to this?
Yes, I think my colleagues here have done a really good job of explaining, things that maybe we can do better. Um, I think I'm just gonna give you the honest truth here when I'm looking at that question of, how often do students optimize for results rather than building skills? My honest and complete answer is that, students are hardly ever trying to build skills. Student, and it's not because they don't want to, it's because of kind of what Leah mentioned in her response. This is just how it's built for us. I never go into a lecture and after the lecture, everyone's talking about like, wow, I can't wait to go do this thing later in my job or in my future career, or I can't wait to see how this applies to this like theory I'm thinking of. No, people are talking about like, what grade did you get on that test? Um, what are you doing to study for the next one? How soon is the next one? People are thinking, unfortunately, about your assignments, how much they're worth, what percentage, and how the rubric is going to be graded and things like that. And again, I don't think that's because students don't want to focus on skills. I don't think that's because students don't want to be more involved in that learning process. It's just because that is how it's set up. So I think if we're going to really interrogate that question of, why are students not focusing on skills? Why do students seem like they don't care about learning? I think first we need to interrogate how do we build a better system where students are able to focus on those things. And it's just not here yet. Even in, a higher level, graduate level work where we're supposed to be seeing that, it's still the same. So, how can we be better about that? And I think, as I mentioned, my colleagues here have brought up some examples. Um, but yeah, I think we need to approach assessment completely differently if we want to see if you want to see students care about those things.
Yeah, and there was just a comment in the chat about changing the system. Um, because I think, Bo, you had put in the chat a little while ago, actually, how some people are at a disadvantage because they don't have families that have gone through this before. They don't know how to advocate for change or how to, um, approach the system, and they might be at a disadvantage because they don't have those skills yet. And so, changing the system is one of those ways. And I mean, just hearing this panel hopefully will help some instructors think about their system and ways that they can help improve as well. Oh, yeah, Leah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in quickly here. Something that Sam said really connected with me. As I mentioned before, one of my fields of study is political science, and this is completely anecdotal, but something that I've experienced in the political science department is sort of an inability to reach that A to A plus sort of barrier. And I've talked to so many TAs, professors, academic advisors about it, and their response has been, well, at this university, we just don't give 90s. It's just not how it works. And I think that that has become so common in higher education to say, this is just the peak of your accomplishment, and there's no overcoming that barrier. And, that's fine. You want to deflate your grades, you can do that. But I think that the problem with that is that it also puts a cap on student effort. Students learn that you can't get that 95, you can't get a certain grade, and because that pressure on GPA and achievement, students sort of realize that, oh, if I can't achieve that anyways, if I can't overcome that barrier no matter how hard I try, then I might as well just not try. And I've heard from so many academic advisors, and they say, do you want to go to law school? And I say, yeah, I want to go to law school. And they say, maybe you should switch your major. And there's so much sort of view of students say, maybe I should just take on a less challenging task. So I think a part of changing higher education institutions is to stop making barriers that students cannot overcome and stop discouraging them from taking on those challenges.
Stop diminishing the intrinsic motivation to learn. Absolutely. Samantha?
Yes, I just want to piggyback off that again, which, yes, I think that's such a big thing, Leah, especially in more like larger schools or, higher ed universities. And I think I definitely felt that. I'm someone who's actually been to community college and then a state level college and then like a university, and then like I feel like I've been in a lot of different settings, and even at community colleges, I feel like there's truth to that, and I think ways that those things show up, and I want to bring up back Bill's point of you as an instructor alone can make so much more of a difference than just your coursework or really anything else that you're pushing forward to students, is just being more flexible. And I think that's what we're all kind of bringing up here is we need our systems to be more flexible. Um, and, to think of my own example, I remember in one of my courses recently, actually, our assignment was just supposed to be pass or fail grade. And really, it should just be, and it was an opinion piece. So it should just be you're putting in the effort, you've really given a critical analysis, and you've done what you needed to do. But I remember writing this piece and being afraid to put what I was really thinking because I knew how my professor thought about certain things already. I My professor had already showed up in a way in that classroom that taught me that I can't do or express myself in certain ways in front of her. So because of that, I definitely took the safer option in that assignment, and I didn't fully say what I wanted to say in what should have been a very simple assignment. And I think that across the board, different disciplines, there's many examples of how that can occur. So yeah, I think what we're talking about, I think just building in more flexibility could already do so much.
Yeah, that lack of or the discouraging of creativity and using your voice at a time when we're telling students to use your voice instead of letting AI do it, is something that we really need to take into consideration. Bill?
And I also feel like there, like at least in some places that I've seen, there's almost like a disconnect between what like the teacher's like understanding or the professor understanding of what the student's goal is. Like think about like why students want to go to school or why students work so hard to go to like a prestigious college. It's because they want to get a job, right? It's I think if you ask the question, if you're offered a full-time job right now, would you drop out of college? I think a high number of people will say, yeah, I'll do that, right? So I think the ultimate goal of any class is to support students in their like academic journeys while giving them additional information to boost their like life. So I think the ultimate purpose of any like professor's motivation should be that how can I benefit the student as much as possible while telling them that this will benefit you. It's not about like, oh, if I think the intention of making students learn is great as long as the students learn why this is necessary. I think this like if any student wants to take a class for the sake of their like for the sake of their career the and then the professor is like we're going to force you to do all of these things for the sake of like assignments and your grade and then the students automatically assume that because of a higher grade they're going to get a higher job. I think that's the reason they push for that grade. But if you're telling them that okay, if you do these things and actually learn it, this will benefit you in certain ways. Like then that way students will have a much higher like likelihood of actually learning and applying these skills instead of just saying, "Oh, I'm just here for the grade." Because I think that's what ultimately matters, and that's what the professor should always tie back. Like, if you do this, it's going to boost your skills in this way, and that's what you're going to learn. And that's most important, I think.
Sending them with lifelong skills. All right. Wow. That was such a good conversation. So, question number four, if we can move into the next question here. Not all assessments capture what students can actually do. Some make learning visible by showing skill, performance, and growth, while others reduce learning to getting the right answer or following a narrow set of steps. So, thinking about this, and I'm sure all of you have this assessment that genuinely reflected your abilities, whether it was a project, a presentation, performance, portfolio, real world task, and one that really missed the mark in showing your actual abilities. What really made the difference between those two experiences in revealing your learning? Anybody want to start with this?
I can go ahead.
Okay.
I would say, in terms of an assessment that I felt genuinely reflected my abilities, I actually talked to Dr. Yanio about this, but I took a qualitative methods class last semester. And typically my experience in those, introductory classes is just reading about experiments that have been done, reading about established scholars in the field. But actually the bulk of the class was actually us students going out and doing field work and conducting participant observation studies and in-depth interviews to actually explore different social phenomena and see how it plays out in the world. And the assessment was about our ability to identify patterns and theories and the things that we have been reading about in real life, rather than just, filling out the right answer on a Scantron based on some theoretical scenario that we're never going to see. And I think that that was really responsive, because what stood out to me about that class was that it wasn't organized around producing a single right answer or memorizing, the date that this specific study was published, but different students focused on different details. They asked different questions, they noticed different behaviors, and they arrived at different interpretations and analyses, all of which were valid if they were clearly reasoned and actually observed. And it wasn't about being evaluated based on our ability to memorize the right answer, but how clearly we explained our choices, how critically we were able to analyze what we actually saw. And I think as a result, we were able to learn through practice and through observable practice. We were able to learn how to ask better questions, how to collect good data, how to engage in nuanced and critical analysis. And that was something that really stood out to me. In terms of an assessment that missed the mark, I saw actually a comment in the chat about this, about multiple choice exams. This is a surprising answer because surprisingly, these are the ones that I tend to get the best grades in. Tests that emphasize pure memorization of the material. My friends actually make fun of me because during every spare moment of the day, I'm on my phone going through flashcards on Anki studying for these tests. And I feel that that's so evident that so many students feel that it's not really about our mastery of the material or our understanding or actually internalizing the things that we've learned, but it's more about how much time we're willing to contribute to studying. And I think there's absolutely a time and place where memorization is important, especially in foundational courses, introductory courses. But I also think that there are limits to its effectiveness, especially for students who don't have that luxury of time, who work part-time jobs alongside university, who are taking more than a full course load, who have responsibilities in the home. And I think that putting a pure focus on memorization-based multiple choice tests, yes, sometimes it can be just the nature of the limit of funding and the number of students in higher education institutions. But I think it's also important to consider that oftentimes that's inequitable for students who have different circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. Anyone else want to contribute to this? And I do want to point out we do have about 4 minutes left with this panel before we move into breakout rooms number 3 or breakout 3 time slot. So, Bo, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, Leah, that was perfect response to that. I was kind of the opposite though. Like I wouldn't take the time to spend memorizing the things that were probably necessary to help get me that letter grade. I was the guy that I would always be there at every single class session because I loved the interactions and what I was drawing out from the lectures and from the conversations with my classmates. I had a very strange experience though. I took a computer science class. I think it was my freshman or sophomore year, and it was really about. I'm going to date myself here. It was Visual Basic. So, very old, thing to be learning in your computer science course, but it was very much about the memorization and everything being done step by step. And fast forward to my doctoral work, I had the strangest one. I was literally the only student in the class. And so the professor and she and I would meet. I think it was on Wednesdays, and it was literally just what can Bo and I talk about today, and what can we do for in terms of creating an opportunity for a project that would be something useful for him, and so I loved that I had that chance to literally have those one-on-one conversations with her, but the open-endedness of the project that we developed together was one of the most meaningful experiences of probably my entire doctoral work. And obviously that's not realistic for very many people. I'm assuming most institutions would shut that down immediately because there's not enough students to fill a section. But we went ahead and powered through it, and it was a great learning opportunity for me because of that open-endedness, and because I was able to create something that was personally meaningful out of it.
What an amazing experience. Samantha, I see your hand up.
Yes, I'm gonna just try to jump right into it. Just what the difference to me is between like what I'm thinking about. And I think for me, the difference between those two assignments, were that it didn't come down to whether or not the assessment captured my thinking or did it actually capture my final answer. So I think that was the key thing that I'm thinking about with my example is just, is the thing that you're doing actually capturing how the student is thinking through that process, or is it just that end product, their final answer, and you don't even know how they got there? And I think if we can think more about that before, that reasoning that went into it. And maybe they didn't get the right answer, but their reasoning did kind of showcase that they have learned in a way and learned from you. I think that if we start looking more at that, we're going to be able to get more get more out of what we're looking at for students. Sorry, I tried to be quick.
The process and the skills that are learned, we should be looking at that for sure. Bill, we have about 1 minute. If you want to share about an assignment, we'd love to hear from you too.
Yeah, I think like actually I'm currently in like a computer science class and it's one of the like the best classes I've taken. I think the idea of a good assignment is that it's frequent and low stakes. And also the most important part is that the professor explain why this is necessary. If you're just testing for the great reason of testing, that's obviously going to stress students out. But if you're going to say like the quiz is meant to test your fluency on this subject. And then we also have another thing called a writing session where you recreate your homework, like the homework that you solved on the spot in 5 minutes. Like that's very high pressure, right? But I think the professor explained that this is to test your ability to like remember and to understand quickly. So it's not necessarily about like the assessment itself, but I think it's about like the explaining. One of the worst I like assessment I have is like the ones where they're just testing for no reason or they're unnecessarily hard without explaining things. Like the professor is just making things really tedious. And those classes are usually the ones that have the lowest motivation to do. Yeah, I think that's my experience.
I really cannot thank you all enough. If you could see the notes that I took during this and how many more questions I came up with that I'd love to ask you if we had more time, I could spend all day just asking you questions and just thinking about just how to improve my instruction and help change the system, even if it's just from my own classroom, and the ways that we could help students learn and take real life skills with them that will help them in their field, regardless of what they're going into. Thank you all so much for taking this time and giving us such thoughtful answers, but also things that leave us with a lot of, reflecting to use as well. Thank you all so much. This was really, really powerful, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it. So thank you all for joining and enjoy the rest of the SLO symposium.